this gift of love and righteousness, scorned by the ones he came to save, till on that cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. Every sin on him was laid. Here in the death of Christ I live. There in the ground his body lay, light of the world by darkness slain. Then bursting forth in glorious day, up from the grave he rose again, and as he stands in victory, sin's curse has loosed its grip on me. For I am his, and he is mine, bought with the precious blood of Christ. No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man can pluck me from his hand till he returns, calls me home. Here in the power of Christ I'll
Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. The days of Holy Week have brought us to the day of resurrection, and I invite you, wherever you are, to listen to the Easter story from Mark's Gospel and to imagine that morning. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there's the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And with these words, the Gospel of Mark comes to a close, with the women fearful, fleeing from the tomb, saying nothing to anyone because they're afraid. Biblical scholars have long been puzzled by this curious ending to Mark's gospel, but almost all agree that Mark's gospel actually concluded in its original form with this unsettling lack of confidence and completion. The ending seems so strange to many in the early church that some well-meaning writers added some alternative endings. But it's generally agreed, and the oldest manuscripts confirm, that Mark's gospel originally finished in such a startlingly unfinished sort of way, with those followers of Jesus fleeing from the tomb because they're afraid. And to top it all off, most of our English translations, the final word in Mark's gospel is the word afraid. Isn't that interesting? That the Easter story and the entirety of the gospel according to Mark ends with the word afraid. It's interesting because God tells us so many times in His Word not to be afraid. Some have counted that God tells us 365 times in the Bible not to be afraid, as if we needed a daily reminder of this. Isn't it interesting that Mark's gospel ends with this picture of people weighed down by fear? Especially when we realize that Mark wrote and published his gospel at least 20 or 30 years after the resurrection, at which time the Christian movement was alive and flourishing and spreading with enthusiasm throughout the world. By the time Mark wrote down his gospel, the followers of Jesus who appear so fearful at the end of this story were among the same disciples who are proclaiming the gospel courageously and fearlessly, who are performing signs and wonders through the resurrection power of the Lord. Mark knew that. The early Christian communities who first heard and read Mark's gospel knew that. But yet God inspired Mark to finish his gospel with everyone being afraid, as if to say to all who would hear and read Mark's gospel, even to us today, if you find yourself afraid, if you find yourself unsettled or uncertain about the future, the God of resurrection power will triumph over all that would make us afraid. Through the power of His Holy Spirit, God will empower us to live with Easter faith today and every day. And the God who raised Jesus Christ from the grave will surely bring us through this current crisis we face. Most of us will survive the coronavirus, but even if we don't, as Easter people, we know that death is nothing to fear. For in life and in death we belong to God. And death opens us to a glorious resurrection. Remember what Paul said in Philippians, For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. So however this situation turns out for us, we win. So amid all the fears and uncertainties in our world today, remember we are Easter people, and we can declare with confidence and without fear that because He lives, we can face tomorrow. Because Jesus lives, all fear is gone. Because we know who holds the future. Life is worth the living because He lives.